Hi, I'm John Cate, lead singer and songwriter of the Van Gogh Brothers. On behalf of the Music Museum of New England, a nonprofit enterprise dedicated to capturing the history of popular musical history of New England. With me today is Ryan Walsh, founder of the Americana band Hallelujah the Hills and author of Astral Weeks, A Secret History of 1968, which chronicles Van Morrison's time in Boston during the period, as well as the evolution of music and culture in Boston during that time. Hi again, Ryan.
Hi.
How's it going?
Very well. Thanks again for talking to me.
Thanks for being with us. Let's see. So, in what I would like to cover in this segment is the evolution of music in Boston and Van's role in that. So you go into detail of the pop music history in Boston in the book, which I personally enjoyed since I remember much of this scene. What do you think the 4 or 5 major factors were that led to the creation of the vibrant folk and rock scene in Boston between 1960 and 1980?
Well, I mean, it's so many different little factors. The folk revival was centered around Club 47 in Harvard Square, and it had a lot to do with Joan Baez being there. And then there, in the mid '60s, the garage rock, the Lost, Barbarians. It's almost just like a collection of accidents that add up to a story eventually.
That's so cool. Do you think they were accidents, or can you point to some specifics in the book, such as when we talked a little bit about the Tea Party?
Uh-huh.
So I guess I was looking at how you saw those different factors coming together to create such a vibrant environment.
Wait, I don't. Sorry, I don't. I'm not following.
So you talk about a few things in depth. You talk about Ray Reapin and the Tea Party, WBCN, the Lyman family, and then of course the experiments with Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary. Good Friday project, as it were. You talk about social elements and political elements, of course, but you talk more about the social elements at that time. And then there were the media elements. And I was wondering in your mind how those connected and how those related to the development of music. There's a thread there.
Well, yeah, I mean, any place where that's ground zero for LSD, I think there's going to be some strange reverberations. So that made, for instance, that made a lot of sense to me when I figured out not only did Leary and Alpert do Harvard LSD experiments in the early '60s, but it had been here for over 10 years prior to that. At Boston Psychopathic over in Fenway. But when you talk about how did these things connect, basically, I mean, I tried to leapfrog from one story to the other without a bunch of non sequiturs. So anytime a certain person appeared in multiple stories, like Gunther Wile's a great example. He's at that Good Friday experiment in the basement of Marsh Chapel. And then a few years later, he starts Intermedia Studios and is helping Aerosmith record Dream On. So
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like connect the dots. And to put it into a narrative that makes sense of the whole story, I hope that's what the book does.
Well, it does. And I think that there is a connection, and as you say, that particular connection is a direct connection. So you've got LSD in the basement, Intermedia Studios, and Dream On. Perfect example.
Yeah, right.
Hilarious, in fact. Then you have other things that were occurring, such as the Lyman family, Avatar, that input into the social cultural fabric. That had an impact certainly on the culture and community. I wonder how that translated into the music, or did it?
Well, I mean, for example, though the Lyman family started out telling a Globe reporter that one of their goals as a community was to create the most beautiful music the world had ever known. So, there's a statement of intent right there, and it's about music, but they actually ended up making far less music than they had in the, Queskin and Lyman had in the previous years to that statement and the formation of the community. So that story is kind of about how far afield they went from that kind of initial declaration of intent.
Could you talk a little bit about the Jim Queskin Jug Band and the Lyman family, what the connection was there?
Sure. Well, Jim Queskin formed the Jim Queskin Jug Band, and they were a very influential act. I mean, Dylan quoted Queskin as being one of his favorite singers. They played Newport Folk Festival. They played with the Doors, Janis Joplin, the precursor to the Grateful Dead with Garcia and Ware. They were just straight up cribbing Queskin set lists of, the songs he had found off the anthology of American folk music. So a really well-respected, loved act in the 60s. And then in 68, Queskin dissolves the band because he's worried it's silly and a waste of time, and he moves up to Fort Hill to follow his old bandmate Mel in his new community, his new family.
So there's another incredible example of a highly influential group of musicians, and intersecting with, as you say, a happenstance of the Lyman family here in Boston, and the way those two cultural iconic, really, at least locally iconic, cultural aspects of the city came together. That in that sense, almost in a negative way, because of Lyman's, whatever his gestalt that had to do with him being king, if I could coin that phrase, and Jim seeing perhaps his own work and music as being less valuable or less poignant than perhaps Mel's statements that he wanted to make to society. And of course, that's kind of unfortunate, but again, another connection of the dots there.
Right.
Beautiful. Do you see any other, can you think of any other examples like that in the book? So now we've connected LSD with Intermedia and Aerosmith, Jim Queskin to the Doors, Janis Joplin, and others back to Lyman. Can you think of any other, maybe one more example of that in this?
Well, it's kind of the two people who keep reappearing in the book again and again is Van Morrison and Mel Lyman. I use them as two kind of counterpart stories because they're both kind of questing for something spiritual through music, and they're living near each other, and they're both on the same record label, and they end up in really different places. So I thought that was interesting. And, when I'm trying to connect these dots, suddenly when John Payne, the flute player on Astral Weeks, tells me that right after they cut that record, he went up to Fort Hill, and they were excited because they all read his chart and said he was a Capricorn, and they wanted him to join the family. And then they redid his chart, and he wasn't a Capricorn, and he was kind of shown the door. But that kind of linkage between the two storylines was always finding a needle in a haystack for me.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That was incredible. I loved hearing about John Payne. I remembered seeing John play all over Boston back in those days. But what would have been a post-Van period for John. but very well known locally and respected.
Yeah. Yeah, I consider John one of the heroes of the story. I just love his, how his persistence when he was in the sessions for Astral Weeks. Warner Brothers were paying him and Tom to be there, but they were slated to not appear on the album. And John really talked his way into that live room.
I love that part of the book.
Thank you.
He wasn't going to be left out. He just was not going to be left out.
Yeah, and that's and now we're so lucky he did that.
Oh my God! I wondered how John felt after that about the whole experience, and you touch on that a little bit in the book. Can you talk about John's emotions around that, the sort of the aftermath and the outcome?
Well, the way he explains it is he eventually got bored of playing with Van Morrison because the chord structures for Van songs are pretty simple. He's a jazz guy.
Sure is.
It was exciting at first, but he just kind of lost interest and went home. And Tom, the Boston bass player, he actually moved to Woodstock for a while, hung on a little longer, but eventually he got married and was going to have a kid, and he called it quits too. So that's kind of the end of the Van Morrison controversy, as they were called.
Right. That's right. And I remember hearing the name The Controversy back then, probably from one of the local newspapers. Do you think, sort of changing tracks a little bit, but still staying with the evolution of music, do you think MGM's Bosstown Sound campaign helped or hurt Boston's image in music?
It was kind of a double-edged sword, wasn't it? Because it earned so much ink press at first, but then everyone kind of cited the backlash as hurting the music scene for years until the Cars and Aerosmith kind of come along. And so, but the frustrating thing to me is really wasn't any of the musicians' fault. It's all record executives and marketers kind of just dropping the ball and putting nuclear bombs on ads for music, and that mushroom cloud as we see on the screen. It just kind of the marketing was tone deaf and kind of a grab for another San Francisco sound. But I wasn't there, of course, but when I talked to everyone in those bands and I listened to the records, I think if they were left alone to develop their own sound over a few years, things would have, it would have been a lot more productive for everyone. Like when Dick Weisberg from the Beacon Street Union told me that the backlash made the band kind of infight, that was, that's a heartbreaking thing to hear because they started out with a dream, as any band does,
Right. What a great perspective. Do you have a sense as to why Van was left out of that whole campaign? Was it? Do you have a sense of whether he wanted to be part of it, or whether the labels wanted him to be part of it, or was it just?
Oh, I mean, I don't. I'm sure Van was eager to talk to anyone at a record label, but no one really knew him as a Bostonian. So, and plus, he's friends with Wolf, and Wolf famously told Dick, also from Beacon Street Union, don't get involved with these guys. And he was like, why? Is it a bad deal, bad label? He's like, no, we all haven't paid our dues enough. Dick eventually recognized that what Wolf said there was right. But yeah, I don't think anyone was confusing Van as part of the Bosstown Sound. Maybe the Velvet Underground. I did find a few ads where the Velvet Underground were right alongside Orpheus, Spinach, and Beacon Street Union.
Wow.
Because they were MGM too, Verve Records.
I was just going to go into that a little bit. And the question was, do you know, was there a reason that you know of why Van wasn't more active at the Boston Tea Party in much the way the Velvet Underground and Andy Warhol were during their year-long residency at the Tea Party, which is, again, is another thing that people don't know a lot about. But do you have a sense of as to why Van wasn't as active as someone like the Velvets?
Well, he was. He just wasn't. It wasn't all shows at the Tea Party. I kind of reconstructed Van's spring summer itinerary of New England shows, and it's busy. You know, he's playing amusement parks, roller rinks, high school auditoriums. Like the band he was there to work and play and perform. It just wasn't all at the Tea Party.
Okay, yeah, because we don't associate him with the Tea Party the way we do the Velvets, although only people that know the Velvets' history associate them with the Tea Party. But yeah,
right. I mean, it helps that the Velvets' back cover of White Lightweight Heat is that photo taken in front of the Tea Party. You know, that really.
I forgot about that.
Yeah,
amazing.
And, you know, and I love the idea of Jonathan Richman learning how to play guitar from VU's Sterling Morrison in that back room. I'll get in trouble for saying the Tea Party back room because apparently backstage was on the other end, kind of in the front of the club.
Right.
Been corrected a few times on
that. You also talk about the shadowy figure of Steve Sesnick in your book, which I enjoyed greatly, having been quote unquote managed by Steve, as I mentioned in our pre-interview.
So could you tell me, I'm curious, what was it like to be managed by the infamous Steve Sesnick?
Well, I will share some of it with you. It was very flattering, first of all, because he had come out of that Warhol scene and had access to people like Andy and Gore Vidal and the Hemingway sisters. And, you know, I'd go to New York to see Steve and have those experiences. And of course, that was for a young guy. I think I was 18 or 19 at the time. It was, I thought, you know, it was like, wow. I was sort of in the middle of what you'd see on the cover of back then Life magazine or something. Mm-hmm. You know, it felt really special. So from that perspective, and no one can take this away from Steve, he was there at the creation of the Factory with Andy and with the Underground. He was part of that scene, but he clearly had some struggles of his own, character struggles, and they led to the demise of my group. And I have heard through the grapevine they led to the demise of the Velvet Underground. So without, I don't want to malign anyone, but without doing that was that certainly a factor, and it was scary.
Okay. Well, Doug Yule, of course, says that Sesnick pitted everyone in Velvet Underground against each other, and that had a lot to do with Lou leaving. It had a lot to do with the eventual demise of the band entirely. I tried to talk to Sesnick. He's still alive. I could not get a hold of him. But I'm so interested in someone who was so plugged into the New York Factory scene, what compelled him to start to be so attracted to Boston, because he was telling people he co-owned the Tea Party, which just wasn't true. And I even found some like correspondence where he was writing letters to local TV press, thanking them for coverage on behalf of the Tea Party. So whatever the truth of that was, he really loved the Tea Party because he also booked the Velvets there dozens of times.
Right.
I would love to know why he had such a hard-on for Boston. Excuse my language.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know that piece of it. And he certainly had access in New York. I mean, I'll never forget going to Elaine's, the restaurant on the Upper East Side in New York, and sitting down with Muriel and Margot Hemingway for dinner.
Wow. Yeah,
it was a trip. Wow. So yeah, I always wondered why he was here too, but I didn't wonder that much because it was all working for me being a Bostonian. Until it wasn't, and like Doug's explanation, same thing happened with my group. It was identical, pitting members against each other, and I think I found out why the group broke up 14 or 15 years after the fact. So
wow,
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
I'll share that story, the details of that story with you some other time when it's not my interview.
Okay. Okay.
But let's see. I don't think I had any other questions. I think my final question on that segment was, where Van factored in on the local scene, and I remember your itinerary in the book. I don't know,
Yeah.
it wasn't a list, but it was, you spoke about a lot of dates. But I did want to sort of zero in on the Tea Party. So, and I'm glad you brought that back up. That Van was very active here. He did lots of gigs while he was here, and thank you for going into the John Payne piece of that story too. So we'll be.
Yeah. I mean, and I found it so interesting that in the years to come after Astral Weeks, Van did tap players from Boston, the Bosstown Sound, to back him up on Moondance, on St. Dominic's Preview. It was very interesting to me because he must have, one would assume he met them while he was here,
Another wonderful postscript.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. We'll come back on the next segment.
Okay, great.